In the gold and glass ballroom of the Beverly Hilton, under chandeliers that gleamed like judgment, a broken man wearing a perfect smile was about to rewrite his legacy with one reckless gesture. A night meant for charity and image rehabilitation turned volatile when Will Smith, hungry for redemption, chose the wrong legend to turn into a punchline. Chuck Norris wasn't just another honoree with a resume of old glory. For 50 years, he'd been a fighter, teacher, and quiet sentinel of control, known for winning wars before they started by never losing himself. When Will's hand rose in mock defiance, he wasn't performing a joke, he was reenacting a wound. But Chuck didn't retaliate. He simply redirected. A whisper of movement, a shift of energy, and in that instant, a lifetime of ego collided with a lifetime of mastery. What began as a televised stunt became a live sermon on humility. By the time the cameras cut, the gala's laughter had died, and a new legend had been born. One where Hollywood's loudest man learned the quietest lesson of all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The grand ballroom of the Beverly Hilton glittered like a galaxy brought down to earth. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Camera flashes pulsed like heartbeats, each one capturing forced smiles that would be dissected on social media within seconds. This was the Hollywood Hearts Charity Gala, where the industry's elite gathered annually to celebrate philanthropy while secretly measuring their relevance against one another. Tonight was different. The tension beneath the champagne bubbles felt sharper, the laughter a touch more brittle. The gala was being broadcast live across America, a rare move that transformed private industry ritual into public spectacle. The producers had promised unscripted moments of Hollywood magic to donors and viewers alike. Lana Rivers moved through the crowd like electricity, her emerald gown catching light as she paused to chat with each cluster of celebrities. As the night's host, a late-night sensation known for balancing humor with unexpected depth, she carried both the show's energy and its conscience. 3 minutes to air, a producer murmured in her ear. Lana nodded, her practiced smile never wavering. Across the room, Chuck Norris sat quietly at a front-row table. Unlike the surrounding tables crowded with entourages and handlers, his held only 3 people. His wife Gina, his longtime friend and former student Reggie Martinez, and himself. At 75, Chuck carried the same upright posture and clear gaze that had defined him decades earlier. His black suit was simple, tailored, but not showy. He didn't gesture broadly or laugh loudly like others around him. He simply existed solid as bedrock amid the performative chaos. When approached by younger stars or industry executives, he listened more than he spoke. His rare smiles came naturally, not for cameras. The respect he commanded required no announcement. People instinctively straightened their posture when approaching his table. "Chuck Norris, ladies and gentlemen," a passing director said to his group. "The last of the real ones." Chuck acknowledged the comment with a slight nod, then returned to his conversation with Reggie, who now served as head of security for the event. "Crowd seems tense tonight," Chuck observed quietly. Reggie, broad-shouldered and vigilant even in formal wear, scanned the room. Live broadcast. Everyone's looking for their moment. He paused. Will Smith just arrived. The ballroom's energy shifted subtly as Will Smith entered through the main doors. His entrance wasn't the loudest of the night, but it generated the most whispers. 3 years had passed since his infamous award show controversy, and despite public apologies and carefully orchestrated comebacks, Hollywood remained divided on his rehabilitation. Will moved with the exaggerated confidence of someone fighting to reclaim lost status. His smile was blinding, his laugh too loud, his gestures too broad. He stopped for every camera, embraced every colleague as though they were long-lost friends. His wife had chosen to attend a different charity event that evening, a detail not lost on the gossip columnists positioned strategically throughout the room. "I'm back, baby," Will announced to no one in particular as he high-fived a group of younger actors who welcomed him like returning royalty. "Tonight's gonna be legendary." Behind his performance, though, lurked something hollow. His eyes darted frequently to other tables, measuring reactions. Each time someone turned away or whispered behind their hand, his smile faltered for just a heartbeat before returning brighter than before. Lana approached the stage as the house lights dimmed slightly. The room quieted. Phones raised to capture the moment. "Welcome to the 27th Annual Hollywood Hearts Charity Gala," she began, her voice striking the perfect balance between warmth and wit. "Where we gather to prove that, yes, contrary to popular belief, Hollywood does have a heart. We just keep it in a vault next to our original faces." The crowd laughed appreciatively as cameras panned across tables. "Tonight, we're honoring those rare individuals who use their platform not just for themselves, but for others," Lana continued. "People who understand that true strength isn't about how many followers you have or how many tickets you sell, it's about the lives you touch when no one's filming." The camera found Chuck Norris, who sat comfortably in the spotlight's glare. Unlike others who immediately straightened or smiled when they realized they were on camera, Chuck remained unchanged, present, attentive, but unperforming. Will Smith, seated at a table near the center of the room, watched this reaction with a complicated expression. He leaned toward the young actor beside him. "Man's a legend," he said, loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Been in the game forever, and still commands respect." The words sounded admiring, but beneath them ran a current of something else. Envy, perhaps. Longing. Will's gaze lingered on Chuck for a beat too long, his smile tightening at the corners. "Tonight's main honor," Lana announced, "will be the Lifetime Achievement in Humanitarian Work Award, presented to a man who has spent decades not just entertaining us, but teaching discipline, respect, and service to generations of young people through his youth foundations." The ballroom erupted in applause as Chuck's face appeared on the large screens flanking the stage. The camera caught the slight discomfort in his expression at being the center of attention, not performed modesty, but genuine humility. Will clapped harder than necessary, rising halfway from his seat. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" he chanted, encouraging his table to join. His eyes darted around, making sure people noticed his enthusiasm. As the applause faded, Lana introduced the night's first performance. Will leaned back in his chair, phone in hand, scrolling rapidly through social media. His name barely appeared in the live coverage. Comment sections debated whether his career would ever fully recover. 3 years of careful image rehabilitation, and still, he remained defined by a single impulsive moment. On stage, a young pop star performed a ballad about redemption and second chances. Will's fingers tightened around his phone. Across the room, Chuck Norris listened attentively, still as water, commanding respect without demanding it. Will's publicist approached, bending to whisper in his ear, "You're presenting the tribute to action stars in 30 minutes. Keep it light. Keep it humble." "I know how to work a room," Will interrupted, his voice sharper than intended. He caught himself, forcing his expression back to easygoing charm. "Sorry. Just want tonight to go perfectly." His publicist nodded, not entirely convinced. "Just stick to the script." Will watched her walk away, then turned his attention back to the stage. His leg bounced restlessly under the table. The path to redemption felt endless, the scrutiny exhausting. One moment had defined him, perhaps another moment could redefine him. His gaze drifted again to Chuck Norris, sitting in perfect stillness. A plan began to form, not fully conscious yet, more instinct than strategy. Something bold. Something memorable. Something to remind them all who Will Smith really was. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick note to himself. Surprise bit with Chuck. Funny. Respectful. Viral. On stage, Lana announced the upcoming tribute to action stars who had used their platforms for philanthropy. Sometimes the toughest fighters are the ones with the biggest hearts, she said, her eyes finding Chuck in the audience. Will pocketed his phone, a slight smile playing at his lips. The night suddenly held promise. He would create a moment spontaneous, headline-grabbing, career-redefining. What could possibly go wrong? Backstage was a labyrinth of temporary walls, lighting equipment, and harried production assistants with clipboards. Will Smith paced a small section of hallway near the green room, muttering to himself as he reviewed notes on his phone. In 20 minutes, he would present a tribute to Hollywood's greatest action stars, a segment that would culminate in Chuck Norris receiving the first honor of the night for his decades of youth outreach work. Mr. Smith? A young production assistant approached hesitantly. Just confirming you have the script changes for the tribute segment? Will looked up, flashing his trademark grin. Got 'em right here. Gonna be great. The assistant nodded, clearly starstruck despite Will's controversial status. The teleprompter will have everything. But if you want to go off script, I'm thinking a little improvisation might make it more authentic. Will interrupted, his tone light but brooking no argument. You know, keep it real. The assistant's smile faltered. Miss Rivers asked that presenters stick to script tonight, since we're on a tight broadcast schedule. Don't worry. Will clasped the young man's shoulder. I've been doing this since before you were born. Trust me. As the assistant retreated, Will's smile faded. He turned to the monitor showing the main ballroom, where Lana Rivers was introducing a video package about the charity's work with children's hospitals. The camera panned across celebrity reactions, practiced compassion on display. Then it found Chuck Norris, whose attentiveness seemed genuine, unaware of or unconcerned with the camera. Will's phone buzzed with a text from his publicist. Stay on script tonight. He pocketed the phone without responding and continued watching the monitor. The ballroom erupted in applause as the video package ended with children thanking their celebrity visitors. Chuck applauded with quiet sincerity while others around him stood, seeking the camera's attention. Lana returned to the microphone. And now, we have a special tribute to honor those action heroes who fight for justice not just on screen, but in real life. Will took a deep breath, straightening his bow tie. A makeup artist rushed over for final touches. Make sure I'm camera ready from all angles, he instructed. I might move around a bit out there. On the monitor, Lana continued. To present our tribute to action stars who became real-life heroes, please welcome the Fresh Prince himself, a man who's been punching aliens and saving the world on screen for decades, Will Smith. Will rolled his shoulders back, summoned his brightest smile, and strode onto the stage with the easy confidence that had made him a global superstar. The applause was enthusiastic but not overwhelming, polite rather than adoring. Thank you, Lana. You're looking gorgeous tonight, Will said, his voice finding that perfect balance of smooth and sincere that had defined his public persona for decades. He turned to address the room. What's up, Hollywood hearts? Y'all ready to celebrate some real heroes tonight? The crowd responded warmly. Will paced the stage with loose-limbed ease, commanding the space as he had countless times before. You know, I've been lucky enough to play heroes on screen. Aliens, zombies, robots, I've fought 'em all, he said, generating appreciative laughter. But the real heroes are the ones who keep fighting when the cameras stop rolling. The teleprompter scrolled steadily with the approved script, but Will's eyes began to wander from it. He moved to the edge of the stage. "Speaking of real heroes, Chuck Norris, everybody." Will gestured toward Chuck's table. The crowd applauded as cameras found Chuck, who acknowledged the attention with a modest nod. Will continued, now fully off script. "You know what's crazy? Chuck's been kicking butt for what? 50 years? And he's still terrifying." This earned stronger laughter. Encouraged, Will began moving down the steps at the side of the stage, microphone in hand. "For real, though, Chuck Norris facts were the original internet memes, am I right?" Will approached the front tables. "Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups, he pushes the earth down." The audience laughed, though a few exchanged uncertain glances. At the production table, Lana Rivers whispered urgently to the director while keeping her professional smile intact. Will reached Chuck's table, where the martial arts legend sat watching him with calm, unreadable eyes. "Stand up for us, Chuck. Let the people show some love." Will extended his hand. After a brief pause, Chuck rose with easy grace that belied his 75 years. He shook Will's hand firmly, but didn't play to the crowd's energy. "Ladies and gentlemen, a true legend," Will announced, not releasing Chuck's hand. "You know what impresses me most about Chuck? The man never lost his cool. Never had a scandal. Never had a bad moment caught on camera." The room temperature seemed to drop a few degrees as the subtext registered. Some uncomfortable laughter rippled through the audience. Chuck's expression remained neutral, though something flickered briefly in his eyes, not anger, but awareness. Will continued, his voice taking on an edge beneath the smile. "Must be nice, right? To always be the good guy? To never mess up in front of the whole world?" Backstage, Will's publicist was frantically gesturing for the production team to cut to something else. Lana Rivers rose slightly in her seat, sensing the moment veering toward disaster. "You know what, Chuck?" Will said, his voice louder now, performing for the cameras he knew were capturing every word. "I've always wondered if those reflexes are the real deal, or just movie magic. What do you say we give these folks a little demonstration?" Before anyone could react, Will raised his hand in an exaggerated motion, a clear reference to his infamous awards show moment, and swung it toward Chuck's face in what was intended to look like a mock slap. Several things happened simultaneously. Reggie Martinez half rose from his seat, security instincts kicking in. Lana Rivers stood completely, already formulating damage control. The audience gasped collectively, phones raised to capture what they thought would be a comedic moment. But Chuck Norris, 75 years old and still possessing the body control of a lifelong martial artist, moved with liquid precision. Without apparent effort, his left hand deflected Will's approaching arm, redirecting its momentum. His right hand lightly pressed Will's shoulder, adding just enough force to the redirection. The result was both graceful and devastating. Will's own momentum, amplified and redirected by Chuck's minimal movement, sent him spinning off balance. His feet left the floor as his body rotated, and he crashed onto an empty table several feet away, sending champagne glasses shattering across the floor. Absolute silence fell over the ballroom. Will lay sprawled across the broken table, shock written across his face. Chuck Norris stood exactly where he had been, his posture unchanged. Expression calm, but alert. He hadn't moved toward Will or away from him. He hadn't raised his voice or shown anger. He had simply redirected. After what felt like an eternity but was merely seconds, Reggie rushed to Will's side to help him up. Cameras captured every moment: Will's shock, Chuck's composure, the audience's stunned expressions. Chuck finally spoke, his voice carrying in the silence. "You all right, son?" The question, asked with genuine concern rather than mockery, somehow made the moment even more powerful. Will stared at him, his carefully constructed persona completely shattered. Lana Rivers stepped in smoothly. moving to the stage with practiced crisis management. Let's take a quick break, everyone. We'll be right back with more inspiring stories from Hollywood hearts. Ah, Horace. Ah, Lana Rivers stepped in smoothly, moving to the stage with more inspiring stories. As the broadcast cut to a pre-recorded segment about the charity's work, the ballroom erupted in frantic whispers. Phones lit up as guests frantically messaged what they'd witnessed. Security personnel converged on the scene. Chuck hadn't moved. He simply watched as Reggie helped a dazed Will to his feet, the younger man's face a complex mixture of humiliation and awakening. In the chaos, no one noticed Chuck's slight nod, not of satisfaction or triumph, but of recognition. The lesson wasn't one he had planned to teach, but perhaps it was one that needed learning all the same. The silence lasted precisely 3.5 seconds, an eternity in broadcast time. Will Smith lay sprawled across the remains of Table 27, shards of crystal champagne flutes glittering around him like fallen stars. His bow tie had come undone. His expression cycled rapidly between shock, embarrassment, and dawning comprehension. 300 celebrities and industry elites stared in collective disbelief. 80 million viewers watching the live broadcast held their breath. And then chaos. "Get the cameras off him," shouted a producer from somewhere behind the main stage. "Stay on it! Stay on it!" countermanded another, recognizing television gold when he saw it. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Phones rose in unison throughout the ballroom, capturing what broadcast cameras might censor. Security personnel converged from all directions, like antibodies rushing toward an infection. Gasps and murmurs swelled into a roaring tide of reaction. Through it all, Chuck Norris stood exactly where he had been, unmoved and unmoving. His posture remained relaxed, his breathing steady. Nothing in his demeanor suggested he had just effortlessly launched one of Hollywood's biggest stars across a ballroom. Reggie Martinez reached Will first, his security training overriding the shock on his face. "Don't move," he instructed, kneeling beside Will and checking for injuries. "Medical's on the way." Will waved him off, struggling to sit up amid the debris. "I'm fine. I'm fine." But his voice lacked conviction, and something beyond physical pain haunted his eyes. Chuck finally moved, taking a single step forward. The crowd parted before him instinctively, cameras tracking his every movement. He stopped at a respectful distance from Will, not looming, but present. His voice, when he spoke, carried easily, despite its quietness. "Need a hand?" The simplicity of the question somehow cut through the circus atmosphere. Will looked up, meeting Chuck's gaze directly, for perhaps the first time that night. What passed between them in that moment was private, despite the hundreds of witnesses, a wordless acknowledgement from one martial artist to another. Will nodded once, accepting both the offer and something deeper beneath it. Chuck extended his hand, the same hand that had redirected Will's energy seconds before. Will hesitated only briefly before grasping it. Chuck helped him to his feet with surprising gentleness, steadying him when he wavered slightly. "My fault," Will said, barely audible to anyone but Chuck. Chuck's response was equally quiet. Recognition is the first step to correction. The moment stretched between them, witnessed by millions yet somehow intimate. Then Lana Rivers stepped in, professional instincts kicking into high gear as she reclaimed control of her show. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying above the murmurs, "what you've just witnessed is a powerful reminder that in Hollywood, even our unscripted moments have impact." She moved smoothly to Will's side. her hand on his elbow, both supportive and guiding. Perhaps especially those moments. "Are you all right, Will?" The question forced Will back into performance mode. He straightened, summoning a shadow of his trademark grin. Yeah, just took a little detour off stage." His laugh sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Guess I learned why you don't mess with Chuck Norris." The weak joke earned nervous laughter, breaking some of the tension. Lana smoothly guided Will toward the wings while continuing to address the audience. "We're going to take a short break to check on our friend here, and when we return, we'll present our first award of the evening." She turned to Chuck, who had returned quietly to his seat. "Chuck Norris, I hope you're ready for your spotlight moment, though I think you've already given us the most talked-about demonstration of the night." As Will exited the stage, leaning more heavily on Lana than he wanted to admit, the audience's reaction crystallized into something unexpected. Applause. Not mocking or pitying, but genuinely appreciative, the kind usually reserved for performers who continue after a fall or technical mishap. The gesture seemed to recognize something honest that had broken through the evening's veneer. Backstage was controlled pandemonium. Production assistants whispered urgently into headsets. Publicists huddled in emergency consultation. A medic approached Will with professional concern. "I don't need medical," Will insisted, pulling away from both the medic and Lana's supporting arm. "I need a minute." He walked unsteadily down the hallway toward his assigned dressing room, ignoring the calls of his publicist, who had materialized from somewhere in the chaos. Inside, he closed the door and leaned against it. Eyes closed, breathing hard. For the first time in years, perhaps in his entire career, Will Smith was completely, terrifyingly unscripted. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. His agent, his publicist, his manager, all demanding explanations, all crafting damage control strategies. Social media was undoubtedly exploding. Clips would already be circulating. Narratives would be forming beyond his control. Will ignored it all, moving to the small bathroom where he splashed cold water on his face. In the mirror, he confronted a truth he'd been avoiding. The man staring back at him was a stranger, constructed from audience expectations and industry pressures. Beneath the perfect smile and practiced charm lurked something hollow, a performance without substance. A quiet knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Go away," he called, not yet ready to face the machinery of celebrity rehabilitation that would inevitably surround him. "It's Chuck," came the reply. Simple and direct. Will froze, water dripping from his chin. Of all the people who might have followed him, Chuck Norris was the last he expected, and perhaps the only one he couldn't refuse. He opened the door to find Chuck standing alone. No entourage, no security. Just a man in a simple black suit with clear eyes that held neither judgment nor pity. "May I come in?" Chuck asked. Will stepped back wordlessly, allowing him to enter. The door closed behind them, sealing out the chaos of the gala for a moment. Chuck didn't speak immediately. He moved to the small seating area and sat, gesturing for Will to join him. Despite everything, Will found himself responding to the older man's quiet authority. "They're going to want me back on stage soon," Chuck said finally. "But I thought we should talk first." Will struggled to meet his gaze. "Look, I'm sorry about what happened out there. It was supposed to be a joke." "Was it?" Chuck interrupted, his voice mild but direct. The simple question cut through Will's automatic defense. He fell silent, confronting the truth. It hadn't been just a joke. It had been a desperate grab for relevance, a shortcut back to the top, a bid for attention wrapped in humor to make it palatable. "I don't know what I was thinking," Will admitted finally. Chuck nodded, accepting the honest answer. "Fear does that. Makes us reach for control in all the wrong ways." Fear? Will's defenses rose again. I'm not afraid. Aren't you? Chuck's gaze remained steady. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being defined by your worst moment instead of your best. Each word landed like a precise strike. Will looked away, unable to maintain eye contact under such accurate assessment. I've been in this business a long time, Chuck continued. Seen a lot of stars rise and fall. The ones who last aren't the ones with the most talent or the biggest openings. They're the ones who know themselves off camera. It's not that simple, Will protested. One mistake and they, Chuck echoed thoughtfully. Always they. But who exactly are you performing for, Will? The audience? The critics? Your peers? He leaned forward slightly. Or yourself? Before Will could answer, another knock came at the door, more insistent this time. Lana's voice followed. Will? Chuck? They need you both back on stage in 5 minutes. Be right there, Chuck called, not taking his eyes from Will's face. He stood, straightening his jacket with unhurried movements. Your body betrayed your intention out there. You weren't playing for laughs. You were hunting for validation. Will remained seated, the truth of Chuck's words sinking in deeper than the physical impact of his fall. Chuck moved to the door but paused with his hand on the knob. Real strength isn't about how hard you can hit, he said quietly. It's about how centered you remain when the world tries to knock you down. With that, he exited, leaving Will alone with a reflection that finally showed him something true. Not the mask of celebrity, but the face of a man at a crossroads. Outside, the gala continued. Cameras prepared to capture Chuck Norris, accepting his humanitarian award. Audiences worldwide waited to see if Will Smith would return to the stage. But in the quiet of the dressing room, something more significant was unfolding, the first honest moment in a career built on performance. Will Smith sat perfectly still, feeling the full weight of a question that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with identity. Who was he when the cameras stopped rolling? Lana Rivers had not survived 15 years in late-night television without developing an exceptional talent for damage control. As the production assistant counted down in her earpiece, live in 5, 4, 3. She took her position center stage with the composed smile of someone who'd navigated celebrity meltdowns, technical disasters, and international incidents without missing a beat. Welcome back to the Hollywood Hearts Charity Gala, she began as cameras went live again. If you're just joining us, you've missed quite an eventful evening already. Her tone found the perfect balance between acknowledgement and deflection. Hollywood has always known how to create memorable moments, even when they're not in the script. Appreciative laughter rippled through the audience, breaking some of the lingering tension. And speaking of unscripted moments that matter, Lana continued smoothly. It's time to present our Lifetime Humanitarian Achievement Award to a man whose actions have always spoken louder than words. The ballroom doors opened, and Chuck Norris entered with characteristic modesty. His walk to the stage was unhurried, acknowledging the applause with slight nods rather than expansive gestures. He moved like someone comfortable in his own skin, each step purposeful, neither rushing nor dawdling for effect. As he took his place beside Lana, the audience rose in a standing ovation that felt more genuine than obligatory. Even those who had been checking social media feeds moments earlier put away their phones to applaud the man whose composure had transformed potential scandal into something approaching wisdom. Chuck, Lana said when the applause finally subsided, your Kickstart Kids Foundation has helped over 100,000 at-risk children learn discipline, respect, and confidence through martial arts. Tonight's award recognizes not just your generosity, but your understanding that true strength begins with character. Chuck accepted the crystal statue with a simple, Thank you. He stood before the microphone, scanning the room briefly before speaking. His eyes passed over the empty seat at Will Smith's table without lingering. I'm grateful for this recognition, he began, his voice clear but unadorned by performative inflection. But I've always believed that our actions, not our accolades, define us. The audience listened with unusual attentiveness. Celebrities accustomed to checking phones during speeches sat fully engaged. Martial arts taught me something valuable early in life. Chuck continued. True power isn't about dominating others, it's about mastering yourself. The strongest opponent you'll ever face is your own ego. The words hung in the air, resonating beyond their simple delivery. No one missed the connection to what had transpired earlier, yet Chuck made no direct reference to the incident. At our foundation, we teach kids that a black belt is just the beginning of the journey, not the end. Mastery isn't about perfection, it's about response. How do you respond when you're tested? When you fall? When you fail publicly? At the back of the ballroom, a side door opened quietly. Will Smith slipped in, now dressed in a fresh shirt and jacket. His publicist hovered anxiously beside him, whispering urgent instructions that he seemed to be ignoring. Will's face had shed its performative mask. He looked somehow younger and older, simultaneously vulnerable in a way celebrities rarely allowed themselves to appear in public. Chuck noticed his entrance, but gave no sign beyond a barely perceptible nod before continuing. The children we work with often come to us angry, defensive, looking for ways to prove themselves through force, he said. Our job isn't to teach them how to fight. It's to show them they're already worthy of respect. That validation comes from within, not from dominance or external approval. Will moved slowly along the back wall, his publicist trailing behind like an anxious shadow. He stopped near a service entrance, listening intently, making no attempt to rejoin his table or draw attention. I accept this award on behalf of our students, Chuck concluded. Young people who are learning that the toughest battle isn't against others, it's against the voice inside that says you're defined by your worst moment rather than your best potential. The applause that followed held a quality rarely found in industry ceremonies, a thoughtful appreciation rather than obligatory celebration. As Chuck stepped away from the microphone, Lana moved forward to reclaim the program's flow, but a voice from the back of the room interrupted. Lana? If I could say something? The audience turned collectively to find Will Smith standing at the rear, hand slightly raised like a student seeking permission. A murmur rippled through the crowd as cameras swiveled to capture this unexpected development. Lana hesitated only briefly before her professionalism reasserted itself. Of course, Will. Please. Will's publicist made a last desperate attempt to intercept him, but he gently shook his head and moved forward. He walked not toward the stage but through the center of the ballroom, past tables of colleagues who watched with expressions ranging from anticipation to discomfort. I wasn't planning to speak again tonight, Will began, his voice lacking its usual polished resonance. But after what just happened, I think I need to. He stopped in the open area before the stage, making no attempt to climb the steps or stand beside Chuck. Instead, he looked up at the martial arts legend with something approaching reverence. First, I want to apologize to Chuck, Will said, turning briefly to address the room. What I did wasn't a joke. It was desperate and disrespectful. The admission hung in the air, raw in its honesty. Social media managers throughout the room frantically typed, capturing a moment of genuine vulnerability from one of entertainment's most carefully managed personas. But I also want to thank him, Will continued, surprising everyone. Because what happened out there wasn't an attack or a humiliation. It was. He searched for the right word. A redirection. Chuck watched silently from the stage, his expression revealing nothing, yet somehow conveying complete attention. All my life, I've been fighting for the spotlight, Will admitted. Chasing applause, hunting for validation. And somewhere along the way, I forgot the difference between being seen and being known. His voice broke slightly on the last word. The room held perfectly still, witnessing something rare in celebrity culture, authentic struggle, without the safety net of scripted contrition. Chuck didn't push me away out there. He just... Will made a gentle gesture with his hands, mimicking the redirection movement Chuck had used. He just let me feel the natural consequences of my own momentum, my own choices. Will turned fully toward Chuck now. I came at you thinking I could use you as a prop in my redemption story. I thought I could harness your legend to rebuild mine. But you showed me something better than a comeback. You showed me what it looks like to stand firm in who you really are. For the first time that evening, emotion flickered across Chuck's stoic features, not pride or satisfaction, but simple recognition. He descended the steps with quiet dignity until he stood facing Will, eye to eye. The hardest person to face honestly is yourself, Chuck said. His voice pitched for Will but carried by the room's perfect acoustics. Takes more courage than any fight I've ever been in. Will nodded, swallowing hard. I'm learning that the hard way. Without fanfare, Chuck extended his hand. Will took it, and this time the handshake wasn't a performance for cameras. It was a genuine exchange between two men, one at the beginning of understanding and one who had walked the path decades before. Lana Rivers, recognizing the weight of the moment, waited until they had finished before gently reclaiming the program's flow. Thank you both, she said, genuine emotion coloring her professional tone. I think we've all just witnessed something more valuable than any prepared speech. As Will made his way back to his table this time, without the swagger that had marked his entrance, the audience responded not with the awkward courtesy he might have expected, but with something approaching respect, not for his celebrity or his charm, but for his willingness to stand vulnerable in a room that typically rewarded only polished perfection. Reggie Martinez intercepted Will before he reached his seat. That took guts, the security chief said quietly. Real ones. Will nodded, the simple acknowledgement meaning more than the effusive praise he'd grown accustomed to. Thanks. As the gala continued, something subtle had shifted in the ballroom's atmosphere. The poses seemed less rigid, the laughter more genuine. Even the live broadcast felt different, less like a choreographed showcase, and more like a genuine gathering of human beings with all their flaws and potential. At the head table, Chuck Norris sat quietly beside his wife, who squeezed his hand with private understanding. He watched as Will rejoined his table, accepting both supportive touches and curious glances with equal grace. Chuck's expression remained calm, but those who knew him well might have detected the faintest suggestion of a smile, not at Will's earlier humiliation, but at what had followed. Not at a fall, but at the beginning of something rarer in Hollywood than any award. Authentic growth. The lesson had not been the one he'd planned to deliver that night. But perhaps, he reflected, it had been the one that needed learning most. The video had already amassed 12 million views by the time the last guest departed the Hollywood Hearts Gala. Will vs. Chuck trended worldwide, spawning memes, think pieces, and frame-by-frame analyses of the moment Chuck Norris had redirected Will Smith across the ballroom. But unlike most viral celebrity moments, the narrative refused to settle into simple mockery or manufactured outrage. Something about the raw honesty of Will's return to the floor, his unscripted vulnerability in a setting designed for artifice, had resonated beyond spectacle. The clips being shared most widely weren't of his fall, but of his return. The moment two men stood face to face, without performance between them. Entertainment news outlets scrambled to contextualize what they'd witnessed. Some framed it as comeuppance, others as redemption, Martial arts experts dissected Chuck's technique, marveling at how he'd neutralized Will with minimal force. Body language analysts pointed to the subtle shift in Will's demeanor before and after, the collapse of practiced charisma into something more genuine. Phones across the industry lit up with frantic texts from publicists to clients. Did you see what happened? Career suicide or comeback? Should we release a statement of support? Hollywood, an ecosystem built on carefully managed perceptions, didn't know quite what to do with authentic human moment broadcast live to millions. At the production trailer outside the Beverly Hilton, Lana Rivers sat with her team reviewing footage as technicians disassembled equipment around them. Her showrunner paced nervously behind her chair. "The network's called 3 times already," he said. "They want to know if we planned this. If we have exclusive follow-up rights." Lana watched the monitor, where Will's unscripted apology played on loop. "Tell them the truth," she replied, not taking her eyes from the screen. "Some things can't be manufactured." "So, that's a no on exclusivity?" the producer pressed. Lana finally turned to face him. "That's a, let's give them space before we commodify their moment. Some things deserve to breathe before we package them for consumption." Inside the nearly empty ballroom, the cleaning crew worked methodically from the back, leaving the area near the stage for last. 3 figures remained in conversation at a small table near where everything had unfolded hours earlier. Reggie Martinez stood with his back against the wall, arms crossed, watching Chuck Norris and Will Smith seated across from each other. His security earpiece occasionally crackled with updates from his team, but he responded with minimal movements, unwilling to disturb the conversation unfolding before him. "So, what happens now?" Will asked, his voice holding none of the practiced charm that had defined his public persona for decades. He looked exhausted but somehow unburdened, like a man who had finally set down a weight he'd been carrying too long. Chuck considered the question, taking the same measured approach to words that he did to movement. "That depends on what you learned tonight." "That I shouldn't try to slap Chuck Norris?" Will attempted a smile, but it faded quickly under Chuck's steady gaze. "Try again," Chuck said quietly. Will looked down at his hands, scarred from decades of action films, and carefully maintained to appear younger than his actual age. "That I've been looking for validation in all the wrong places." Chuck nodded slightly, but remained silent, waiting for more. "All these years," Will continued, finding his way toward a truth he'd been avoiding. "I've been chasing applause, awards, box office numbers, thinking they would somehow fill this emptiness." A cleaning crew member approached their section, but quickly retreated, when Reggie raised a hand, silently requesting more time. "Fame is a hungry beast," Chuck observed. "The more you feed it, the more it demands." Will nodded, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Every new hit just raised the bar. Every award just made me more afraid of failing next time." He gestured vaguely toward the stage where everything had unfolded hours earlier. "What happened tonight? It wasn't about you at all, was it? It was about me needing to be seen so badly that I didn't care how I got there." "Recognition is the beginning of change," Chuck said. The words were simple, but delivered with the weight of someone who had lived their truth rather than merely spoken it. Will leaned back in his chair, looking up at the crystal chandeliers now dimmed to their night setting. "You know what scares me most? I'm not sure who I am without the performance anymore. I've been Will Smith for so long that I don't know where the brand ends and the man begins." For the first time that evening, Chuck's expression softened into something approaching compassion. "That's a common realization for those of us who've lived most of our lives in front of cameras. The difference is what you do with it." "What did you do?" Will asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier defensiveness. Chuck was silent for a moment, gathering thoughts rarely shared in public. "I went back to basics. Started teaching again. Spent time with family. Remembered that martial arts was never about the spotlight, it was about the discipline of showing up every day and facing yourself honestly. He gestured toward the door where earlier he'd entered without fanfare. Notice I don't have an entourage? No manager hovering? No publicist crafting my image? That's deliberate. Keeps me grounded in reality rather than perception. Will nodded slowly. I can't remember the last time I went anywhere without a team managing my image. Might be worth trying, Chuck suggested. Hard to hear your own thoughts with that many voices competing for attention. From his position against the wall, Reggie watched the interaction with quiet respect. Few people had witnessed Chuck in these unguarded moments of mentorship. Fewer still had seen a star of Will Smith's magnitude stripped of his performance armor. As Chuck's former student and now head of security, Reggie understood better than most the gap between public persona and private reality. He'd worked events where celebrities arrived, humble and left demanding, where alcohol and adulation transformed reasonable people into entitled caricatures. But what he witnessed now was the opposite transformation, a man of immense fame voluntarily stepping out of his protective bubble of status to engage with painful truth. Reggie had seen Chuck redirect physical attacks countless times over the years, but this psychological redirection seemed even more powerful. You know what's killing me right now? Will said after a long silence. My phone. It hasn't stopped buzzing since it happened. He pulled it from his pocket, the screen lighting up with a cascade of notifications. Publicist, agent, manager, studio execs. Everyone's in crisis mode. Crafting statements, damage control strategies. Chuck gestured toward the device. Turn it off. What? Turn it off. Chuck repeated. Not silent. Off. Will stared at the phone, his lifeline to the machinery that had maintained his image for decades. His thumb hovered over the power button, hesitating. That's where it starts, Chuck observed. The choice between managing perception and experiencing reality. After another moment's hesitation, Will pressed the button, holding it until the screen went black. The simple act seemed to physically affect him, his shoulders lowering slightly as if unburdened. Been a while since you did that, hasn't it? Chuck asked. Years, Will admitted. Literally years. Their conversation paused as Lana Rivers approached, having changed from her formal gown into simple jeans and a sweater. Her professional mask had slipped away with her stage makeup, revealing the thoughtful woman behind the polished host persona. Sorry to interrupt, she said. Security needs us to wrap up so they can close the building. Chuck rose with the easy movement of someone who had maintained his physical discipline despite advancing age. We were just finishing. Will stood more slowly, the physical and emotional tolls of the evening evident in the stiffness of his movements. Lana, I want to apologize for derailing your show tonight. She waved away the apology with unexpected candor. Are you kidding? The network's thrilled. We just got our highest ratings in 5 years. Her smile turned more genuine. Besides, it's not often we get to witness something authentic at these things. Usually it's just speeches thanking people no one's ever heard of while everyone checks their phones under the table. Will laughed a real laugh, not the practiced chuckle he deployed for talk shows and junkets. Glad my public humiliation served a purpose. Not humiliation, Chuck corrected quietly. Redirection. Remember the difference. Lana's professional instincts surfaced briefly. You know, if you two wanted to do an exclusive sit-down about what happened tonight, my show would— Not yet, Will interrupted gently. I think I need some time to process before I turn this into more content. The response seemed to surprise even him. Turning down publicity was not a move from his usual playbook. Chuck nodded approvingly. Wise choice. Reggie approached, professional but with unmistakable respect in his body language. Cars are ready whenever you are." As they began walking toward the exit, a custodian accidentally knocked over a tray of abandoned champagne glasses, the crash echoing through the nearly empty ballroom. The sudden noise made Will flinch, a reflexive response to unexpected sounds developed through years of action film work. But Chuck didn't even turn his head, his body registering the sound, assessing its threat level, and dismissing it in a fraction of a second. The contrast wasn't lost on Will. "How do you do that?" he asked as they continued walking. "Stay so centered. Even with everything that happened tonight, you never lost your calm." "Practice," Chuck answered simply. "The physical discipline of martial arts is just the visible part. The real work happens inside, learning to respond rather than react." "I've spent my whole career reacting," Will admitted. "To critics, to box office numbers, to social media." "And how's that working out?" Chuck asked without judgment. Will's laugh held no humor. "Well, I ended up flat on my back in front of 12 million viewers, so I'd say not great." The cavernous ballroom felt different in the dimmed light. Less like a stage and more like an empty theater after the audience has gone home. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floor, no longer muffled by the crowd's energy. Crystal chandeliers cast long shadows across tables where, hours earlier, the industry's elite had performed their ritual celebration of themselves. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Will said as they neared the exit. "My kids. What they saw tonight. What example I've been setting." He shook his head. "I've been telling them it's all about authenticity while living completely inside this constructed persona." Chuck listened without interrupting, recognizing the importance of allowing this reflection its space. "I don't even know if I can find my way back to who I really am," Will continued. "It's been so long since I made a decision that wasn't filtered through, 'How will this affect my brand?' The path back begins with a single step," Chuck said. "And you've already taken it tonight." They reached the main doors, where Reggie stepped ahead to check the exterior. Through the glass, they could see a small group of paparazzi still lingering despite the late hour. Cameras at the ready. Will tensed visibly. "Great. Just what I need. More footage for the highlight reel." "You have a choice," Chuck observed. "You can exit performing the role they expect, or you can simply walk to your car as yourself." "I'm not sure I remember how to do that," Will admitted. Chuck studied him for a moment. "When did you last do something with no audience in mind? No cameras, no public reaction. Just an action taken for its own sake?" Will thought for a long moment, searching for an honest answer. "I don't know," he said finally. "That's pretty messed up, isn't it? It's just where you are right now," Chuck replied without judgment. "The question is where you want to go from here." Reggie returned, giving them the all clear. "Back exit's also an option if you prefer," he offered Will. Will looked through the glass at the waiting photographers, then back at Chuck. Something shifted in his expression. A decision forming. No more hiding, no more managing perceptions. "If I'm going to start finding my way back to authenticity, might as well begin now." Chuck nodded, approval visible in his eyes. "One last thing," he said as Reggie moved to open the door. "My dojo in Dallas. We work with kids who've lost their way, teaching them that strength comes from discipline, not dominance. If you're serious about reconnecting with yourself beyond the spotlight, you'd be welcome anytime." The offer hung in the air between them. Not a publicity opportunity or a career move, but something far more valuable. A path toward authentic connection. Will extended his hand. "I might take you up on that." Their handshake was different now. Not a performance for cameras or a power exchange, but a simple human connection between two men who had glimpsed something true in each other. Outside, Paparazzi raised their cameras as the doors opened, flashbulbs popping in a frenzy of light. Reggie moved to shield both men, but Chuck stepped forward calmly, neither seeking nor avoiding the cameras. After a moment's hesitation, Will followed his example, walking straight ahead without the practiced poses or signature smile that had defined his public appearances for decades. One photographer shouted above the others, "Will! Chuck! Can you recreate what happened inside?" Chuck kept walking, but Will paused briefly. The crowd of photographers tensed, sensing potential for another viral moment. But instead of performance, Will simply said, "Some lessons don't need repeating once they've been learned." Then he continued walking, not as Will Smith the brand, but simply as a man taking his first steps on a new path, one that led away from spectacle and toward something he had almost forgotten: authenticity. Behind them, the Hollywood Hearts charity gala stood dark, its momentary dramas already fading into industry legend. But what had transpired there continued to resonate not because of its viral potential, but because in an industry built on illusion, truth remains the rarest commodity of all. The night air carried a slight chill uncommon for Los Angeles but fitting for the moment. As Will approached his waiting car, he realized with a start that for the first time in years, he was thinking about neither the past nor the future, neither his image nor others' perception of it. He was simply present, feeling the cool air on his face, hearing the distant sounds of the city, walking forward one step at a time. And in that moment of pure presence, something long dormant stirred within him, not the electric thrill of audience approval or the adrenaline rush of fame, but something quieter and more fundamental. The recognition of his own authentic self, waiting patiently to be rediscovered beneath the layers of performance that had accumulated over decades in the spotlight. The path ahead would not be easy. Old habits of people-pleasing and performance would not disappear overnight. The machinery of celebrity would continue to demand his participation in its economy of image and approval. But as he slid into the backseat of his car, Will Smith carried with him something he hadn't possessed when he arrived at the gala hours earlier: a compass pointing toward true north rather than the fluctuating magnetic field of public opinion. As the cars pulled away from the Beverly Hilton, Lana Rivers stood watching their departure, the professional host in her already crafting tomorrow's narrative, while the human being appreciated the raw authenticity she'd witnessed. In a world of carefully manufactured moments, she had just observed something genuine unfold, not a performance of growth, but its actual, messy, unpredictable process. And perhaps that was the greatest revelation of the evening. That sometimes our most public falls become our most valuable lessons. Not because of their viral potential, but because they strip away pretense and force us to confront who we really are, beneath the roles we play for others' approval. The true aftermath was just beginning. 3 months after the Hollywood Hearts Gala, a nondescript SUV pulled up outside a community center in South Dallas. Unlike the gleaming vehicles that typically transported celebrities, this one bore no special plates, no tinted windows, no hovering security detail. It was simply a car, arriving without fanfare on a warm Tuesday afternoon. Will Smith stepped out wearing jeans, a simple t-shirt, and well-worn sneakers. No designer logos, no carefully coordinated outfit assembled by a stylist. His hair had grown slightly longer, his face showing subtle signs of natural aging that had previously been meticulously concealed for cameras. He stood for a moment, taking in the modest building with its hand-painted sign: Kickstart Kids Foundation, Dallas Center. For 12 weeks, he had disappeared from public view, an unprecedented absence in a career marked by constant visibility. His social media accounts had gone dormant. His publicist had issued only a brief statement about taking time for personal reflection before falling silent. Hollywood had buzzed with speculation. But for once, Will Smith had become notable for his absence, rather than his presence. Inside the community center, 20 teenagers arranged in neat rows performed synchronized kata movements under the watchful eye of their instructor. Chuck Norris moved among them, making small adjustments to stances and offering quiet words of encouragement. Despite his 75 years, he demonstrated each movement with precision that belied his age, not showing off, but simply embodying the disciplines he taught. When Will entered, a ripple of recognition passed through the students. Whispers of, "Is that?" and "No way," threatened to disrupt the practice. Chuck noticed immediately, but didn't break the flow of instruction. "Focus," he reminded them gently. "Remember what we've discussed about external distractions." The students returned their attention to their forms, though occasional glances still darted toward the doorway where Will stood watching. Chuck acknowledged his presence with a simple nod, but continued the class without interruption. Will moved to a bench along the wall and sat quietly, observing with genuine interest rather than the performative attention he might have shown in the past. For 30 minutes, he watched as Chuck guided the students, not with authoritarian commands or flashy demonstrations, but with patient instruction and earned authority. These weren't Hollywood choreographed moves designed for maximum visual impact. They were disciplined forms built on balance, control, and respect. The training session revealed a side of Chuck Norris rarely captured in his action films or internet memes. Here, he wasn't the invincible warrior of popular culture, but a teacher whose strength lay in patience and wisdom. When a teenage boy struggled with a complex transition, Chuck demonstrated it slowly, breaking down the movement into digestible components. When a young girl executed a difficult sequence perfectly, his praise was specific and measured, acknowledging her accomplishment without overinflating it. Will found himself studying not just the martial arts techniques, but the teaching itself, the way Chuck maintained authority without domination, commanded respect without demanding it. There was something profoundly different about this environment compared to the Hollywood sets where Will had spent most of his adult life. Here, growth was the goal, rather than perfection. Process mattered more than performance. When the class finally ended, the students bowed to Chuck, then to the room, then broke into excited chatter as they gathered their belongings. Several approached Will hesitantly, smartphones appearing as if by magic. "Can we get a picture?" asked a teenage girl, voice quavering slightly. Before Will could answer, Chuck's voice carried across the room. "Emma, what's our policy on photos during training?" The girl's shoulders slumped slightly. "That we're here to focus on growth, not documentation." Chuck nodded approvingly, then added with unexpected gentleness, "Besides, Mr. Smith isn't here as a celebrity today. He's here as a student, just like you." The words settled over the room, transforming the atmosphere from excited fan encounter to something more meaningful. Will stood, extending his hand to Emma and the other teenagers. "Maybe another time for those photos," he said. "Right now, I'm just trying to learn. Same as you all." The students departed with barely contained excitement, but something in Chuck's calm authority had prevented the moment from descending into a typical fan frenzy. As the last student left, Chuck approached Will. "You came," he observed simply. Will nodded. "Took me a while to work up the courage. Most worthwhile journeys do." Chuck gestured toward the training floor. "Care to begin today? Or just observing?" Will hesitated. "I wasn't sure if the invitation was still open after I went radio silent for 3 months. True invitations don't come with expiration dates," Chuck replied. "Besides, disappearing from the spotlight for a while suggests you've already begun the real work." Will followed Chuck onto the training floor, removing his shoes at the edge as he'd observed the students doing earlier. The worn mats beneath his feet felt different from the specialized training floors he'd used on film sets. These bore the imprints of thousands of practice hours. Genuine effort, rather than choreographed perfection. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night," Will said as Chuck began demonstrating basic stances. "About why I felt so compelled to create that moment with you. Why I needed the attention so badly that I was willing to disrespect someone I actually admire." Chuck adjusted Will's arm position slightly before responding. "And what did you discover?" "That I've been hiding behind the performance for so long that I forgot who I was beneath it," Will admitted, focusing on maintaining the stance Chuck had shown him. Every decision filtered through, "How will this play to the public?" rather than, "Is this true to who I am?" Common disease in your profession? Chuck observed without judgment. In the weeks after the gala, my team put together 12 different comeback strategies. Will continued, shifting to mirror Chuck's movement into the next stance. Press tours, carefully scripted apologies, charity appearances, all designed to rehabilitate the Will Smith brand. "And yet you're here instead," Chuck noted, "in a community center with no cameras." Will's stance faltered slightly as the truth of this observation hit home. "For the first time in my adult life, I didn't follow the playbook. I just stopped performing." Chuck corrected Will's foot position with a light tap of his own foot. "What did you find in the silence?" "Terror, at first," Will admitted with a rueful laugh. "Like I was having an identity crisis. Who am I? If I'm not being watched, you know?" Chuck nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And after the terror?" Will was silent for a moment, focusing on the discipline of the stance, feeling the unfamiliar stretch in muscles used to different movements. "Relief," he said finally. "Like I could breathe again after holding my breath for decades." The dojo's simple space felt worlds away from the glittering ballroom where their paths had crossed so dramatically. Sunlight filtered through high windows, casting soft rectangles of light across the worn mats. A wall of modest achievements, photographs of students, local tournament trophies, community service awards, told the story of a life built on consistent presence rather than spectacular moments. "I went to a cabin in Wyoming," Will continued as they moved through a series of basic forms. "No staff, no security detail. Just me, and a stack of books I'd always meant to read. First week was the hardest, kept reaching for my phone every 5 minutes. Kept waiting for instructions about where to be, what to say." Chuck listened attentively, occasionally adjusting Will's form with minimal guidance. "Second week, I started sleeping better than I had in years. Third week, I finally cracked open those books." Will's voice carried a sense of wonder. "By the fourth week, I was just existing, watching sunsets without documenting them, eating meals without performing enjoyment for others, being present without an audience." They continued through a series of basic forms, Chuck demonstrating and Will following. Despite his well-documented physical abilities from action films, Will struggled with the precision and balance required. There were no camera tricks here. No second takes. No editing to make him appear more masterful than he was. "Humbling, isn't it?" Chuck observed as Will wobbled slightly in a horse stance. "Extremely," Will agreed, concentration evident on his face. "But that's why I'm here. I need to remember what it feels like to be a beginner again, to learn instead of performing expertise I don't actually have." As they continued practicing, Reggie Martinez entered quietly from a side office. He watched for a few moments before approaching. "Good to see you again," he said to Will, genuine warmth in his voice. "Under better circumstances this time." Will straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. Thanks for not tackling me to the ground that night at the gala. Pretty sure you could have. Reggie laughed. Considered it. But Chuck had it under control. He turned to Chuck. The film crew will be here in 30 minutes for the Foundation promotional video. Thought you might want to know. Chuck nodded. Thank you, Reggie. When Reggie had moved back to his office, Will raised an eyebrow. Film crew? I thought this place was camera-free. For training, yes, Chuck clarified. But we're doing a simple video to help raise funds for new equipment and scholarships. Nothing fancy, just showing what we do here. Will hesitated, then asked, would it help if I participated? Not as a celebrity cameo, but just as someone learning alongside the students. The question hung in the air between them, an echo of their backstage conversation months earlier. But with the positions reversed. Now it was Will offering to step into Chuck's world rather than trying to pull Chuck into his. Only if you're doing it for the right reasons, Chuck said after a thoughtful pause. Will nodded, understanding the test beneath the simple response. No social media posts about my journey. No press release about my transformation. Just helping kids who deserve a shot at learning the things I'm only beginning to understand. Something shifted in Chuck's expression, a subtle approval more valuable than any public accolade Will had received in his decorated career. In that case, Chuck said, I think the students would appreciate it. When the small film crew arrived, just 3 people, with modest equipment, they were visibly shocked to find Will Smith practicing forms alongside Chuck Norris. The director, a young woman with a clipboard and sensible shoes, immediately began whispering with her team about how to capitalize on this unexpected star power. Chuck approached them before they could formulate their plans. Will is here as a student today, not a celebrity, he explained quietly, but firmly. He's happy to be included in the background. But this video remains about the Foundation and its mission, not about star power. The disappointment was evident on their faces, but Chuck's authority brooked no argument. They set up their equipment with occasional glances toward Will, who continued practicing with focused determination, making no effort to charm the cameras or position himself advantageously. When the students returned for the afternoon class featured in the video, their excitement at finding Will still present quickly transformed under Chuck's steady guidance. They fell into their training routine, occasionally helping the newcomer with a stance or transition with the natural generosity of those secure in their developing skills. Among the returning students was a thin boy of 14 named Miguel, who approached the training floor with visible hesitation. Will noticed how the other students made space for him, their body language suggesting a mixture of concern and encouragement. First day back after his father's deployment, Chuck explained quietly to Will. Been struggling with anger issues, acting out at school. Will watched as Chuck greeted the boy with the same calm acknowledgement he offered, everyone not calling special attention to his absence or return, but simply including him in the circle with quiet affirmation. The boy's shoulders gradually lowered from their defensive hunch as the training began. As cameras rolled, capturing the essence of the Foundation's work, something unexpected unfolded. The students, initially self-conscious under observation, found their rhythm and focus. Chuck moved among them, offering the same measured guidance to each young person regardless of their background or ability. And Will, the man who had spent decades at the center of attention, blended into the group as just another student learning, struggling, improving, and discovering the quiet satisfaction of earned progress rather than awarded status. Between takes, Lana Rivers slipped into the back of the room, having accepted Chuck's invitation to see the Foundation's work firsthand. She watched silently, professional assessment giving way to genuine appreciation as she observed the transformation in both the students and in Will. Not what I expected, she admitted when she joined Chuck during a break. I thought this might be another celebrity redemption photo op. Chuck shook his head. Will's been coming 3 times a week for a month. No photographers, no announcements. Just showing up and doing the work. Lana's gaze found Will across the room, helping a younger student correct a difficult stance. He seems different. He's remembering who he was before the world told him who to be. Chuck observed. Most valuable lesson I teach here, and the hardest to learn. The filming continued through the afternoon, capturing the authentic spirit of the foundation. When it concluded, the students gathered in the center of the training floor, forming a circle as was their tradition. Today we demonstrated more than technique, Chuck told them. We showed that true strength is measured not by dominating others, but by mastering ourselves. Each of you displayed discipline and focus under unusual circumstances. He gestured toward Will, standing among them without special status or recognition. We also welcomed a new student who reminded us that growth requires humility. No matter how much success you achieve in life, there's always more to learn. The students' attention turned to Will, but not with the star-struck awe of their first encounter. They saw him now as Chuck did, not as a celebrity, but as a fellow practitioner on the path to self-mastery. Would you like to share anything with the class? Chuck asked Will. Will stepped forward slightly, conscious of the cameras still present, but no longer performing for them. I've spent most of my life trying to be exceptional, he said, finding words for a truth he was still discovering. But being here, learning alongside all of you, has taught me something valuable. There's honor in being a student again. He looked around the circle at the young faces, watching him with new understanding. You all probably thought I came here to teach you something, to share some celebrity wisdom. Truth is, I came because I needed to remember what matters more than applause, authenticity, discipline, and the courage to begin again when you've lost your way. The simple words resonated through the room, landing not as a polished speech, but as a hard-earned truth. The students bowed respectfully, not to Will Smith, the celebrity, but to a fellow traveler on their shared journey. As the gathering concluded, Lana approached Will. That wasn't for the cameras, was it? She asked, her interviewer's instinct for authenticity still sharp. Will shook his head. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm not thinking about how something will play on camera. I'm just present. The network still wants that exclusive interview when you're ready, she said. Professional habit, surfacing briefly. Will smiled, not the dazzling grin that had sold millions of movie tickets, but something quieter and more genuine. When I have something authentic to share rather than a comeback to sell, you'll be my first call. As the center emptied, Chuck, Will, and Reggie stood in the quiet training room. The space felt different now, charged not with celebrity energy, but with something more substantial. You know, that night at the gala, Reggie said, breaking the comfortable silence. When you went flying across that table, I thought we were witnessing the end of Will Smith as we knew him. Will nodded ruefully. You were right. Just not in the way anyone expected. Sometimes our most public falls become our most valuable lessons, Chuck observed. Not because of the humiliation, but because they strip away the pretense and show us who we really are. Will looked around the modest community center so far removed from the glittering ballrooms and red carpets that had defined his existence. I spent decades chasing applause, awards, box office records, thinking they would somehow fill this emptiness inside me. And did they? Reggie asked. Will shook his head. The more I achieved, the more hollow the victories felt. It became about maintaining an image rather than living a life. Chuck nodded in understanding. The most dangerous trap for a martial artist isn't the opponent across from you, it's believing your own legend. As they prepared to leave, Will paused by the door. Looking back at the training floor, where he had taken his first faltering steps toward a different kind of strength. "When I tried to slap you that night," he said to Chuck, "I was really just trying to borrow your authenticity to use your legend to rebuild mine." "And now?" Chuck asked. Will considered the question, feeling the weight of decades spent performing rather than being. "Now I'm trying to find my own authenticity. Not the brand. Not the image. Just the truth." Outside, no paparazzi waited. No fans clustered for autographs. Just a quiet parking lot in South Dallas, where three men stood in the fading afternoon light. "Same time Thursday?" Chuck asked. Will nodded, recognizing the invitation for what it was. Not a photo opportunity or a publicity stunt, but a genuine chance to begin again. "I'll be here," he promised. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, the words weren't part of a script or a strategy, they were simply true. As they parted ways, the lesson that had begun so dramatically 3 months earlier continued to echo. True strength lies not in dominating others for applause, but in the quiet discipline of becoming who you truly are when the cameras stop rolling and the world's attention turns elsewhere. The slap that never landed had delivered its message after all, not through impact, but through redirection. Not through humiliation, but through humble recognition that the most powerful opponent we ever face is the one reflected in the mirror each morning. And in that recognition lay the beginning of authentic strength. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.